Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Seth, psychologist, with Couch Commentary. When I do Couch Commentary, I talk about something that's going on in pop culture a lot of times from a psychological perspective. And I try to look at what maybe we as everyday people can learn from it, what we can take away from it, what's important to focus on, as opposed to sometimes the big, flashy surface details, for example, that we may hear in the news. So, in the media recently, in entertainment news, a lot of people have heard about how Britney Spears' ex husband, Kevin Federline, has written a memoir about his life and many of his experiences. And specifically, he shares some very graphic details about experiences that he shared with Britney Spears when they were married, experiences that he has had with her as a co parent. And many of those details are pretty disturbing and really extreme. Details that I actually won't reiterate here because I don't think that that is a really good purpose. Now, we know about Britney Spears that this is someone who has suffered an unbelievable amount of scrutiny about her personal life, her mental health history. I mean, when we talk about one's health information, one's mental health history, those are really confidential details. And yet, because of Britney Spears' status as really such a famous individual, many of those details about her mental health history have been exposed and shared and hypothesized about. People have hypothesized about her diagnosis. One can only imagine what it must feel like to be the subject of that degree of scrutiny. And I do think after the conservatorship of Britney Spears ended, and actually even leading up to the end of her conservatorship, there was a real change in the tide of opinion on this particular celebrity. And people did really seem to come to see just how unfair and I would argue even misogynistic a lot of times some of that scrutiny, that negative judgments were about her. I mean, this is a human being. Actually, a while ago, I wrote an article for Psychology Today about the fact that this is years ago. Britney Spears actually, I think, did a lot to help to reduce the stigma of people talking about their mental health, talking about mental health symptoms. In the past, it was really considered taboo. People were terrified to share the fact that maybe they suffered from depression, bipolar disorder, any number of severe mental health symptoms. Well, fast forward to today, something like her ex husband, Kevin Federline, releasing a book where he then dredges up the past and details about her that really cast her in many ways in a really negative light. One can only imagine how she must feel. And yet, actually, we don't need to imagine because she has actually released on social media a statement about it. We can all infer, though, a much broader, larger issue that this brings up here, which is that yes, this is a celebrity. Britney Spears is certainly a very famous person. And yet, she is also a person who has a personal life and to some extent has the right to have certain details remain private. One of the things that I think we can take away, just everyday people, when we look at this latest example, take a very, very famous person and then their ex husband writing a book. Here's the question that I think is worth everyone thinking about. You have a relationship, you have a romantic relationship, maybe a long term romantic partnership or a marriage. To what extent is it okay for you to talk negatively about that person publicly? Okay. So when I say publicly, in the case of Britney Spears and Kevin Federline, her ex husband, that could not be a more public example because it will be shared with media outlets really across the globe. But it's not just famous people, though, who can talk publicly to some extent about their ex and really say really negative things. Imagine you may talk to a best friend about your ex husband, for example, and talk negatively about them. That's one thing. And yet you may also, let's say, be at a party in your neighborhood. Let's say there's a neighborhood barbecue and you're there and there are 100 people there. Well, that really too is a very public sort of setting. Somebody could make a comment about your ex and you could maybe say something in that public setting that is either really negative, or you could make an effort to draw a boundary and say, no, maybe to my best friend, I will say something really negative. I will even say the truth. But in a public setting, you could possibly draw the line and say, no, in a public setting, I will show some respect for the person that I had a relationship with, that I once had real emotional intimacy with, that I once had physical intimacy with. And I will draw the line and I will not share publicly really negative statements. And further, a lot of people will decide they will draw the line at not revealing really salacious details that could make their ex partner look bad. I think with the case of Kevin Federline and Britney Spears, this is something that a lot of the public's reaction I've seen online has been so negative about, because there is profit involved. When someone has the capacity to profit from revealing really, really private details that took place, let's say in a marriage or even in divorce between two co parents, the question is, should those details be private? What is fair? And ultimately, I think that people do better when they do keep some details private, when they do respect some boundaries in a relationship, when people are close, even if things were really negative, even things turned really bad in the end, even if a lot of hurts were done. It's one thing to share, to confide to close friends or family members what really happened. I believe that everybody has that right and deserves that, you know? This is often a part of healing, to be able to talk to people about it. But sharing certain details with the public, that's not confiding. That's not confiding at all. In fact, it's really shaming the individual. I think we serve relationships better when we can say, let there be something sacred about them, that there are some details that are not best shared in a public setting. Now, I do believe that people have the right, colloquially speaking, to tell their own story. I do believe that sometimes it is important for people to share what their experience was in the past, maybe in some relationships, what their experience was. But when we start getting into the level of sharing graphic details that are incredibly salacious, or when there is profit taking from it, that is crossing a different line. And that is when we can really run the risk of disrespecting something that was intended to be sacred, which was a love relationship. I'm Dr. Seth, psychologist.